The Indian government has filed an affidavit in the Supreme Court with regard to the Rohingya refugees. The government believes that the Rohingya who have crossed illegally into India may be playing into the hands of Pakistan's rogue inter-services intelligence and even other terror groups like ISIS. Here's a report.
The Indian government has responded to several petitions against its intent to deport Rohingya Muslims. And there are stronger reasons. The government believes to not let Rohingyas stay in India. Reason number one, and it's purely legal. The centre contends that under Article 19 of the Indian Constitution, only Indian citizens have the right to move freely in the country. What more, illegal immigrants cannot seek court intervention. The government says it has the right to exercise its executive power and take policy decisions, especially when it's about national security. Also, the government has inputs some Rohingyas are in touch with Pakistan-based terror groups. Just like the earlier affidavit that the centre had submitted in the apex court, even today, the centre has reinstated its stance by saying that Rohingya Muslims need to be deported and that they pose a national security threat to the country.
In fact, my colleague Jessica Taneja, who filed that report for us, is joining us live from the newsroom for more on that story. Jessica, good evening. The centre in its affidavit today has clearly stated, and I'm reading here, that some Rohingyas are indulging in illegal or anti-national activities. Can you tell us a little bit more about that contention by the centre?
Absolutely, Aisha. That's what the centre has told the apex court. Remember, this is in fact in reference to the previous affidavit which it withdrew, and today it's in fact reinstated what it said earlier. And this time, in fact, giving us more reasons. They say, in fact, that the Rohingyas are indulging in illegal and anti-national activities. By that, they mean they've procured illegal identity cards, or the government feels or has inputs where Rohingya Muslims might have, also indulged in acts like human trafficking and other issues that in fact the country cannot afford to have at this point. So one can only go by what the centre has said in the affidavit, and making additional nuances or comments around it would sound a little bit difficult at this point in time. But when the government has come out with an affidavit and it says it has intelligence inputs, one will have to go by that.
Absolutely. In fact, the centre has also submitted that many Rohingyas figure in the suspected sinister designs of groups like the ISIS, Pakistan's ISI, for instance. Is the argument against deportation, though, then that not all Rohingya refugees are under the scanner, so to speak, as far as their association with these groups go?
Well, absolutely, Aisha. One basket can have a spoiled apple, but it might not rot the others like the scientific phenomena would do. But to understand what they've said exactly, I think what they meant to say was that other extremist groups' affiliation that the Rohingya Muslim might have, even to the Pakistan's ISI or for that matter ISIS, is only purely based on the fact that they believe that they might have an ulterior motive, which includes to flaring up the communal disharmony of the country. At least that's what the government believes that deportation would lead to. That is why they've held such a strong stance, and this is a very strong affidavit, Aisha. If you look at how it's been worded, one will be able to clearly read that the government is completely against, letting the Rohingya refugees enter its territory.
Absolutely. Stay with me, Jessica. In fact, there are political ramifications also in terms of what exactly India's stand is on the Rohingya. It may have disappointed many for failing to meet the expectations from a big power such as India, but the affidavit was rooted in security concerns for the Northeast and the increased footprint of China in South Asian states. WION takes a deep dive into the issue. Take a look.
The centre, in no uncertain terms, informed the Supreme Court that Rohingyas are a security risk to the country and will also prove to be a burden on its limited resources. The centre requested the court not to take the issue up, as the government is already seized of the matter.
The Home Ministry has time and again reiterated that India's position as far as the Rohingya settlements in India are concerned is very clear. They have to go back, and that also equally applies to the Rohingyas who have got illegally settled in in different parts of the country, including Jammu and Kashmir.
Assam has already witnessed mass immigration from Bangladesh over the past 30 years, which has changed the demography of Lower Assam. Both Tripura and Manipur in the past 2 decades have also witnessed massive illegal immigration from Bangladesh. A change in demography has not only created local unrest, but also fueled ethnic and religious violence. Lastly, India had to address this issue without angering both Bangladesh and Myanmar.
जो भी affidavit file करनी है, हम लोग 18 तारीख को affidavit file करें.
Experts feel the centre should have noted the difference between refugees who've been subject to ethnic cleansing and immigrants who, for the want of employment, illegally cross into India. Others feel that the Arkan insurgency's links with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan cannot be ignored.
Please be very clear. No human rights organization or no other country can accuse India of intolerant or dealing with Rohingyas in a very inhuman manner. They are illegal immigrants in India. Deportation has to be through a legal process. We are not going to use force to throw out anybody.
It seems the impact of mass resettlement may not only further polarize the electorate, but that its impact on the fragile northeast demography may be permanent. It is for this reason the centre decided not to let the Rohingyas in. Bureau Report, WION.
India has spoken today in no uncertain terms that the Rohingya will have to leave. The government filed a response in the Supreme Court defending its stance on deporting all illegal immigrants, including those from Myanmar. In a 5-point reply, the central government said that the presence of Rohingyas in India has ramifications on national security, intelligence. Agencies, meanwhile, have uncovered links between the Rohingya and Pakistan's military intelligence. The ISI, as well as terrorist groups like Lashkar-e-Toiba, Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. The Rohingyas are also allegedly involved in mobilization of funds, fabrication of Indian identity documents and human trafficking. This, according to the central government, poses a threat in the northeastern corridor and could spark violence against Buddhists by radicalized Rohingya. India's decision to deport the Rohingya Muslims has not been received well by the international community. New Delhi told the world to stop preaching and to take a look at their own records. Let's start with the United States. After it accepted a record number of undocumented immigrants under former President Barack Obama, the number of refugees entering the US has been cut to half. Meanwhile, the European Commission fares only slightly better. It launched legal proceedings against Poland, Hungary and the Czech Republic because they refused to take in refugees. The feud is over a plan agreed upon by European leaders in 2015 to ease the burden of Italy and Greece. Only a little over 20,000 people have been relocated so far, with the Czech Republic only accepting 12 of them. Right, let's go back to my colleague Jessica Taneja for more on that story. Jessica, we just situated India's stance vis-a-vis other countries and how they sort of respond to refugee crises. But does India's past or past record, I should say, as a country that has been welcoming of and harbors refugees sort of run counter to its stance now? And does that sort of complicate the situation a little further?
Well, Aisha, that's a tough one to answer, but what one can understand from the current stand that the government is taking is all because to protect India's, borders, because there's additional funds that the government would need to secure the borders. Remember, we already, have been paying a lot to sort of strike out the counterinsurgency and the problems on our borders, but this would be an additional cost to the government. But let's not get into that for a minute. But what the central government is trying to say, especially when it comes to India's northeastern corridor, and I'd rather quote the affidavit, which clearly says that a fragile northeastern corridor may become further destabilized in the case of stringency of Rohingya militancy, is what they say. It says, which is the central government has found to be growing. And if permitted to continue, there is also a serious potential possibility of eruption of violence against Buddhists who are Indian citizens who stay on the Indian soil, may be radicalized by Rohingyas. So this clearly is what the government is trying to say. And they do say, in fact, that they have had a factual analysis done as to why it's putting out certain details which would, in fact, harm the democracy or the social fabric or for that matter, the communal disharmony it might create. But one will have to look at it very, very carefully, Aisha,
right,
when the Apex Court will hear the matter again on the 3rd of October.
Absolutely. We'll get back to you then, of course, Jessica, for more on that story. But for now, thanks so much for bringing us up to speed and sharing your perspective on that story.